everybody, and the first big question is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So if you can't, just wave your hands and I'll see if I can do something about it. So anyway, welcome to Stonington Free Library, to another of our Sunday evening lecture series. And first I want to, thank you all for being here, and also to thank our program committee and our wonderful staff who make these programs possible. And then while I'm on that subject, I do want to say something that it's very easy for us to forget. But these programs take an enormous amount of time and talent and thought and energy to put together. They don't just happen. And so I just want to particularly thank our speaker this evening, because I know how much time he's put into it. But this is true for them all, and it's a gift to the library and our community that people are willing to do this. And so I can't say often enough how grateful we are. So this evening, our speaker is well known to many of you as a neighbor and a friend. But I'm going to introduce to you someone you possibly may not know at all. Jonathan Post is the Distinguished Research Professor in English at UCLA, a title, as you may or may not know, that is awarded by a university to a member of the faculty who is internationally regarded for their original contribution to knowledge, and furthermore, as a leader in their field of study. One whose work promises to foster continued creativity in their discipline. A promise we know that is more than fulfilled in the continuing career as a scholar and author we are fortunate to have as our guest. He is the former chair of the English Department at UCLA and founder and director of the UCLA Summer Shakespeare Program in Stratford and London. He has held fellowships from the Folger Shakespeare Library, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Belasco Foundation, among others. He is the author of many books and scholarly papers on both Renaissance and modern poetry, studies of Sir Thomas Browne and Henry Vaughan, and an important critical study of English lyric poetry of the early 17th century, covering writers such as Herbert Donne, Milton Marble, and many others. He is the editor of a very fine collection of essays and writers of the 17th century by contemporary academics and poets titled Green Thoughts and Green Shades. And we have one of those academics with us this evening, which is wonderful. He is the author of a major study of the American poet Anthony Hecht, called The Thickness of Particulars, and as well is the editor of Anthony Hecht's Letters. A noted Shakespeare scholar, he has taught Shakespeare as well as Milton for many years, and is recently the author of the Oxford University Press Very Short Introduction to Shakespeare's Sonnets, which is an important contribution to 21st century Shakespeare studies. It is out of this accomplished background of dedicated scholarship, writing and teaching that Jonathan Post has brought us his latest book, a study of the poetry of Liza Bishop. In the opening paragraph of his book, he describes a remark of hers as saying, much in little. And for me, and for all of us, this sums up perfectly his whole book. It is a combination of skillful compression with deep scholarship that makes this little book an absolute gem. It is indeed much in little. In the epilogue, Professor Post discusses a seminar that he taught on how to read a poem. And in that, he asks the question, does Bishop age well? A May 2nd review this year, May 2nd, in the Los Angeles Review of Books begins this way. It is a measure of the rise and rise of Elizabeth Bishop's reputation that she has now become the only 20th century poet to receive her own dedicated volume in Oxford University Press's very short introduction series. As it happens, the only other poets are Geoffrey Chaucer, Dante, Homer, Ovid, and William Shakespeare. End of quote. In a recent interview, Professor Post said this: "The greatest surprise for an author is the sense of discovery, the sense of seeing something for the first time. The hope is that others too might be led to share in the process of discovery." So yes, I would answer that with this gem of a book, and a scholar and teacher like Professor Post, who keeps our sense of humanity alive, Elizabeth Bishop is here to stay. So with that, please give a warm welcome to our distinguished guest.
Yeah, I've got mine here. I hope.
Go ahead, Belinda. I'm just going to make sure the mic is in a good spot for Jonathan.
Okay.
Everybody should give a talk at the library for two reasons. One is you get to know the people who are so good here, Michaela in particular, in terms of just doing all of the business that's necessary to make something happen. And the other is you get an introduction by Belinda. That's really That is fine. She's a writer of fiction, as you can gather. I wanted to thank one other group of people here. Every book that gets written has some other context to it. And the immediate context for this book on Elizabeth Bishop is a group of readers of poetry in Stonington, and it was created, and it's called, we call the group Poetry by the Sea or whatever, but it was Elizabeth Bishop by the Sea, and a number of you people are here, and I'm grateful for that, and it was a terrific place in which to work out some ideas, to float some thoughts, and I couldn't have done it without that group. One member of whom, of course, is no longer here. Most of us know that Jim Monenbach, who was a great scholar, poet, and literary historian, passed away this last week. And I have to say that without his encouragement, I'm not sure that the book would ever have materialized. But it's typical of Jim that he would give his enthusiasm and support to a literary project. My talk today is just going to interleave various pictures and some poems and a bit of commentary here. And I thought that I would begin just with one slide. This is from a postcard I found in North Haven, where Bishop would go in the summertime later in her life. And it was in the library. And it was written by Bishop in the library, and had it, and they prized it, but no one had ever paid any attention to it. So I took a picture of it, and I was going to go to my facility. And I known it was going to go in the book. I might have at least angled it, but I didn't at that time. Anyway, it's the first thing I mentioned in the book, and I'm going to read the first paragraph of the book, and then you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to read anything more of my own prose from the book. I will occasionally read some things from the book. Anyway, this is it. It's called, Dear Millicent, she's writing to a friend. Dear Millicent, I think this would have been a better photograph if the photographer hadn't been so careful to get the sun or moon exactly on the top of the mast. She speaks her mind. The remark, like so many by Elizabeth Bishop, says much and little. It is written on a postcard, one instance in a voluminous correspondence that kept her connected to a larger world during a lifetime of travel. It forms an observation, In this case, a small seascape with a lobster boat. Bishop always preferred small to large, shoreline to inland. And it is exact in stating a preference, a matter of taste, for the inexact, the off-balance, the imperfect, the line that isn't straight, is seemingly inessential. It even leaves room for error on her part. Is it an image of the sun or moon on top of that mast? She pauses. She isn't sure. Modesty and boldness seem part of a single mind, I think. The book is essentially a kind of spin-off of that comment in the postcard, and it has 6 chapters, and I will just give you the headings so that you'll at least have some sense of what it is, and then we'll kind of just mosey on. The first was mostly biographical with some poems thrown in. The second one deals with forms and formal nature of Bishop's art, and one has to realize that free verse is a form itself, and Bishop is a great experimenter with free verse as well as with received forms. The third is all about her descriptive abilities, and she's a great describer, and it's got a section on a poem called The Armadillo that she wrote. And then, as it turns out, poetry and painting are important in Bishop, and so that gets a chapter. We'll see some of Bishop's paintings in a few minutes. And then I take up the subject of love in her poetry, not so much in her life, but in her poetry. And that does involve a little of her life, but not exclusively. And then the final chapter is on late travel poems. If you ever want an evening over a glass of wine that will just take you all over South America, but elsewhere as well, read some of the late travel poems. They're just absolutely fabulous. Anyway, and then that's it. So what I like to do is to begin the slideshow with a short portion. I think I hope you'll all have fun in this part. Let me just get that. Okay, here we go. One of the wonderful things, by the way, about giving a talk here is that you know Michaela is within practically reaching distance for the great technological moments. Oh, this is Liza Bishop, and there are a couple of neat things about these photos, and I found this one actually in a book by Robert McKenna. Robert McKenna took this photo when she was visiting Bishop in Brazil, and this particular picture is in a volume that Robert McKenna published with a foreword by Richard Wilbur, but no one in the Bishop world knows this one. They know the set from which it comes, and one of the reasons why they don't is because it's collected here, only here, and it's in our historical museum. And Chelsea Richard helped me discover this, so that's kind of a wonderful thing. Now, I wanted to there's a great quotation. Bishop and James Merrill, who lived down the block, as many of you know, were great friends, or became great friends, I should say. And Merrill, probably some of the very best things were ever said about Bishop were said by Merrill. And one of his own descriptions of her, I'm going to read as you look at this picture, when she says, he describes her as possessing her own instinctive, modest, lifelong impersonations of an ordinary woman. Anyway, so there she is as an ordinary woman. Here she is in a slightly different position. This too is in the book, and I'm really proud of this one because I first came across it in Nan Danforth's living room. Nan, take a bow. This again is from a sequence, and people know the sequence, but they don't know this picture. They've never seen it before. And when you write books, they little coups like this that you like, and you think much of it, no one else really does. But this one, you can see she's in kind of the orbital Delphi here, either inhaling or exhaling, I'm not sure which, I guess exhaling maybe you do. And it's a little later picture, but wonderful. I'm going to introduce some of the other things too. I'm going to introduce you to some of Bishop's friends. One of the remarkable things about Bishop's career is she had two extraordinary people involved in her poetic life. Early on, Marianne Moore, of whom this picture shows, and later Robert Lowell. And it's just incredible. It's like having been a student, and first, Picasso was your teacher, and then Cézanne was your teacher, and then Picasso. I mean, it's kind of an amazing grouping of two people. And Marianne Moore is quite a figure you can gather. And she was important to Bishop for all kinds of reasons, but partly because of the restrictive abilities that Bishop picked up on. And she's obviously lovely and quite eccentric. Bishop has a terrific poem to her, but I'm not going to read that. Anyway, there she is in this hat, and she came, and she always wears it, happily. And this is where she is again with the cap. I love this picture because you can actually see her face and her eyes. She's not looking quite at us, but it's just terrific. I just grabbed these off the web, so I can't, there's nothing special about them. This is we're now moving over to Robert Lowell. This is also very well often printed, and I'm including it just because Lowell looks really happy. Bishop and Lowell were near contemporary. She was about 5 years older than Lowell, where she was 30 years younger than Marianne Moore, so quite a different relationship. Lowell is kind of taking it on the chin now, having dominated so much of the middle 20th century, that I just wanted to say that there is no better place to go from than Robert Lowell's initial impressions of the Bishop poem. I mean, they're electric, they're terrific, and then you can go from that. Obviously, he doesn't say everything, but he's got just terrific insights, and I rip them off all the time in the book. And here he is at a more dignified later stage. The relationship between the two is caught up in a collection of essays called Words in Air, and it's on both sides of the correspondence. It's very thick. And anybody interested in just really good letter writing, or just kind of involved in somebody's relationship, this will do it. Don't worry, Julie. We've all happened to all of us. We forgot to, I should now say, time to turn off all the time.
Well, I should have said that.
Right.
Sorry.
Bishop had a number of lovers in her life, and this is not the first, but the one with whom she spent the longest time. We just often refer to as Loda, but her name is Loda Luchero Suarez. And there'll be more about her. She lived in Brazil. Go into that in more detail. I'm not going to go deep into any of these things. And this is her last partner, Alice Mathfessel, whom Bishop met when she was teaching at Harvard. And actually, this picture is taken on North Haven, where the postcard came from. And Alice Mathfessel was the state controller until she died in 2009. These are one of the incredible things about Bishop is she wrote so few poems. And it's really wonderful because you can just have such a good time with them. And these are the 4 books. I just put them in a row. These are close-ups, north and south. This is one of them. You'll begin to start seeing some sort of commonalities and not the covers so much, but in the titles. Geography right away. This doesn't have much geography, just a little kind of flower in front, her second volume. Bishop, by the way, she was born in 1911, and the first book you saw was published in 1946, and this one, I think, came out in 1955. What she did was she wrote a volume a decade, and it really comes, if you do the math, it's about 2 poems a year, which is scarce. This is one questions of travel, and she's using a map and becoming more explicit about travel as her subject, which it so often is. And this is from a late 16th century map of, in this case, the New World, as you can see. That is South Latin America, the bottom part, and North America above it. And this is the last volume she wrote and published in the mid-70s, Geography 3, in which geography once again comes more to the fore with the different equipment that a geographer or an artist would use. And you can see the globe and the books and so forth. This is a book which has 10 poems in it. 10. In order to make it a book, they actually had widened the margins beyond the usual. One of the things that got me started writing about Bishop, I had been teaching for some time, but I have a colleague here who knows more about Bishop than I do. But I had been speaking with an old teacher of mine from Amherst, named David Sofield, and we were having lunch, and I said, Geography 3 is really one of the 2 or 3 best single volume books in the second half of the 20th century, as if I've read all of these books. And I said several because I kept thinking of Merrill's Divine Commons, which is also a wonderful collection. And I have a couple of my favorites with Anthony Hecht as well. And he just looked at me and he just said, Geography 3 is the best book in the second half of the 20th century. And so I thought, okay, good student I am, I will not go off and write Bishop. Anyway, Bishop was an artist and was descended from a family of artists. George Hutchinson, on the mother's side, is an important artist of some ability, and Bishop never did much for her art in the sense that she never tried to sell it, but she painted about 40 paintings have survived, and they're now quite valuable. They go for $30,000 to $50,000 a pop. Anyway, I chose this one because, of course, travel. She got to travel by boat, and because as a flower pot, she was domestic scenes. This one also because it has a stove in it, and I'm not sure the exact location. I think it's probably from Brazil, but it's not like the interior of the place in Brazil. But if you see it in the upper right-hand side, there's a cauldre motor there. And she and Rhoda and Calder were all friends. And Brazil seems like a long way away, perhaps, to us. In the 60s, a lot of people went through Brazil. The U.S. had a big investment in Brazil and so forth. There was a lot of traffic back and forth by artists. Anyway, keep your eye on that stove. And then this is just one of the sort of wonderfully offbeat interior versions of hers where you've got the electrical line going over the ceiling. She painted other things. I'm just showing domestic stuff. She has some landscapes both of Brazil and of Nova Scotia. And she has a number of cityscapes, particularly of Florida, where she also lived for Key West for quite some time. And some of the cityscape views actually appear on her collected poems. So they have a further life just here. Now, this is a map, and I wanted to show you this map because it's so important to Bishop's thinking. And it's also important to my thinking because Oxford was very happy to publish it, but they were a little surprised when they asked me about the credit. It was the last one I got. Getting credits is a nightmare in today's world. But this one was rather easy. I just had to shout down the stairs, and I asked if Courtesy by Susan Garrett would work. And they said, how did you get that so soon? Anyway, so Susan is now an Oxford artist. I chose it partly for that, but also because, as you can see, some of the little figures here. You see the moose up on the top, on the upper right there. See, this is by the way from 1658 Vischer map of the New World, which Susan has updated. All the animals and all the figures are the subjects of some of Bishop's poems. That's the long and short of this thing. And there is the moose, which is one of the great poems, and roosters, which is one of the ones from Florida. And the armadillo is in Brazil, down near the bottom of Brazil. It's not an obvious armadillo, but it's an armadillo. And see these two people down here on the left? Do you know who they are? Can you guess? No, it's not me, no. That's Robinson Crusoe Friday. She has a terrific poem called Crusoe. It's the boats are just artists having fun, throwing different things into it. The compass rose is important because of, again, how it sort of flows into Bishop's sense of direction. Bishop wrote, this is opposite the photo. Yes, all my life I have lived and behaved very much like that sandpiper in her poem, Sandpiper, just running along the edges of different countries and continents, looking for something. I've always felt like it couldn't possibly live very far inland, away from the ocean, and I've always lived near it, frequently in sight of it. Naturally, I know, it has been pointed out to me, that most of my poems are geographical or about coasts, beaches and rivers running to the sea, and most of the titles of my book are geographical too. That's a nice summary of Bishop's thinking right there. Now, I want to do a few more places. This is Bishop's house in Nova Scotia. Actually, it's not her house. It's the house in which her grandmother lived. Bishop, very briefly biographically, was born in, as I said, 1911, and within 8 months her father died of Bright's disease. She was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, and within 5 years her mother was institutionalized in Nova Scotia and spent the rest of her life in the institution in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and Bishop never saw her again. And there's lots of criticism dealing with that particular subject, mostly the psychoanalytic kind. Bishop would go back in the summer times, and she would visit this home in particular, which is where her grandmother is from. And it's still there today. And we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but this is it. You see the telephone wire there. I have 2 versions of this, 3 versions, and each one is a woman. First she's on the left-hand side, and then she's on the right-hand side of the road. And finally I got one where she wasn't in it at all. It's unique within those 2 paintings, or pictures. And then this is an artist rendition that kind of makes it look like, a grandmother's house. What I wanted to know, and one other thing, if you ever want a really wonderful photo tour of Bishop's Nova Scotia, the poet Henri Cole has a terrific little volume where he takes you through, and he's got some prose alongside of it, really takes you through all of Bishop's Nova Scotia. This is a great village where she lived. And I think it appeared in the Paris Review in November of this 2021. So if you want to see more of Nova Scotia in relation to Bishop, you should definitely tune into that. What I want to do here is read one Nova Scotia poem, and it's called Sestina. Most of you sitting here know what Sestina is, but I'm just going to review a couple of simple points about it. The Sestina is a poem in essentially 6 stanzas, and then we'll rest at the end. It's 39 lines, very strictly defined, really from early Italian, 14th century, essentially Dante or Arnaldo was the founder of it. And the curious thing, if you just look at it, and we haven't spent any time in the Sestinas, is the terminal words are the same terminal words in each stanza, but they change their position according to a very specific order. So if you just look at this one, house, grandmother, child, stove, almanac, tears. I won't go into the specifics of the rotation, but you'll see if you go to the next stanza, tears, house, almanac, grandmother, stove, child. The words keep rotating in a very specific system. And it was Sestina brought into English. It became popular in the 19th century again, and Pound made it popular as well. And then Bishop wrote the Sestina, and the Sestina has never been the same since. It's set probably in Nova Scotia. You don't have to know that, but it feels like it. And Bishop valued two things in particular in poetry: accuracy, spontaneity, and mystery. And all of those are embodied in the three poems we're going to look at today. Anyway, I'm not going to say much, I'm just going to read it. September rain falls in the house. In the failing light, the old grandmother sits in the kitchen with a child beside the little marble stove, reading the jokes from the almanac, laughing and talking to hide her tears. She thinks that her equinoctial tears and the rain that beats on the roof of the house were both foretold by the almanac, but only known to her grandmother. The iron kettle sings on the stove. She cuts some bread and says to the child, "It's time for tea now." But the child is watching the tea kettle's small-hearted tears dance like mad on the hot black stove, where the rain must dance on the house. Tidying up, the old grandmother hangs up the clever almanac on its string. Bird-like, the almanac hovers half open above the child, hovers above the old grandmother and her teacup full of dark brown tears. She shivers and says she thinks the house feels chilly and puts more wood in the stove. "It was to be," says the marble stove. "I know what I know," says the almanac. With crayons, the child draws a rigid house in the winding pathway. Then the child puts in a man with buttons like tears and shows it proudly to the grandmother. But secretly, while the grandmother busies herself about the stove, the little moons fall down like tears from between the pages of the almanac into the flower bed the child has carefully placed in the front of the house. "Time to plant tears," says the almanac. The grandmother sings to the marvelous stove, and the child draws another inscrutable house. You can all read that and figure it out later tonight, okay? That's wonderful. It's obviously about the child and the grandmother, and the question everybody says is, where's the mother? And of course, the mother's not there. We can figure out that the father may be there as a kind of a standing figure, but essentially it's about a lot of emptiness. But what she does with the words are just extraordinary. You can watch them just keep changing shape as you go from stanza upon stanza upon stanza. And the meaning of the poem coming up with this. We're going to go from there to Brazil. We're skipping the Florida part of Bishop's life, where she actually owns a home, and there is a society set up in Florida that uses her house. It's the Key West Literary Society, I believe. But as she wrote some very important poems there, it's just we don't have time to do everything. These are current photos. You all know Landy Hammer, or many of you know Landy Hammer. Landy went to Brazil and just got out of there as COVID was closing down. I never made it to Brazil, so he lent me these wonderful photos. This is Lota's house that she had built and helped to build in a place called Samambaia, which is in Petropolis, which is just outside of Rio de Janeiro. Bishop met Lota 1953, I have that right? And they became partners for about 15, 16 years. And the bishop lived in Brazil, though she would go back and forth to the States, but lived in Brazil, really, did an awful lot of wonderful poems there. And this is their house, modernist, and in many magazines. And there's a movie called Reaching the Moon, thank you. And it's set in this house, and it's about Bishop and her relationship with Lota. There's a granite rock above. The house is quite open. This I love because it looks like rain, but I think it's just mist coming off the roof. Landing to a great shot. You can really get a sense of this one. Bishop was also quite interested in architecture, but that's another time and another story. this is the inside, and I wanted to show it to you one of the ones you sent me, because it just shows how easy you can go from the inside to the outside in this house. Very al fresco. And ferns are big in Bishop's poems, and she's going to speak about one of them. And here's a brook, a Valley Brook, with ferns around it. Oh, this is Oro Preto. Bishop had two places. She actually had a third place in Rio, which was an apartment, but she didn't care for Rio that much. Samabea was where she mainly was and voted to study for her. But then, the longer she was there, Bishop also wanted a place in about 5 hours from Rio, and this is called Oro Preto, and it's an late 18th century house, and this is a view from it, out in the valley, and here's the interior, and there's another stove, and as there always is with Bishop. And I just showed you this little setting of her plates and so forth. What I want to do, but I think by the convenience sake, I will just close off this part. I just want to show you Bishop's gravesite for a couple of reasons. One is it's not far from here, it's in Worcester. And we've gone there several times, and you can see the various little stones people have left there around it and so on. And on the gravesite, it says, all the untitled, you read that? Activity continues, awful but cheerful. That's the end of one of her poems, and she wanted to describe on the gravesite. I've always been amazed by the fact that she's buried in Worcester, because of all the places she lived in, she liked it the least. But I guess it's not as if she knew her parents, but you know, as you get older, you start thinking about these things, it kind of becomes almost arbitrary where you end up with your bones. But there she is, it's very convenient. Well, at one point I went there and Sandy McClatchy's book of poems was there. And so all kinds of little nice things happen. There's a terrific Italian delicatessen. If you like eating at graveyards as I do, you can stop and then go to the feast here. It's a very nice place. Back to Brazil. I should put a business slide on here just for a second. Let's get this on. You have a poem called Song for the Rainy Season. And this is a love song about a place, but it also involves another person who's barely spoken about, but is in it, and I just will read it. And this is, it tells you something about the great variety of lines Bishop could employ, and the freedom of her, in this case, quite slender line, doing words. And she's really been captured by the eco-poetic movement as an environmentalist. And you'll see why when we read this poem. Her love for the environment, her love for the person, her love for the house, are all kind of folded in together. Hidden in the high fog, the house we live in, beneath the nebula, rainbow ridden, where blood-black bromelias, lichens, owls, and the link different waterfalls clean, familiar, unbeaten. In a dim age of water, the brook sings loud from the ribcage of giant fern. The vapor climbs up the thick growth, effortlessly turns back, holding them both, house and rock, in a private cloud. At night on the roof, flying drops fall. The ordinary brown owl gives us proof he can count 5 times, always 5. He stamps and takes off after the fat frogs that, shrilling for love, clambering out. House, open house to the white dew, and the milk-white sunrise kind to the eyes, to membership of silverfish, mouse, earthworms, big moths, with a wall for the mildews, ignorant map, darkened tarnished by the warm touch of the warm breath, immaculate, cherished, rejoice. For later era were different. A difference that kills and mutilates much of all our shadowy life without water. The great rock will stare, unmagnetized, bare, no longer wearing rainbows or rain, the forgiving air and the high fog are gone. The owls will move on, and the several waterfalls shrivel in the steady sun. And how pathetic that is of even Stonington, right, as we look out over the brown, dried out place. I have time just for one more poem, and I've chosen this one. It's a late poem, but it's probably the most famous poem she wrote. It's everywhere. And I noticed that the new poet laureate from Kentucky, Ada Limon, in an interview with Jeffrey Brown in NPR, cites this poem as the reason why she became a poet. So it has a continuing effect on the readers. It's called One Art, and it's about the loss of a lover, and people read into it immediately. Loda their relationship came to a sad end. It's not strictly about Loda, and it also includes Alice McFessel, who had temporarily left Bishop. And this poem was written very quickly by Bishop's standards, and it exists in 16 drafts, just to give you an idea how many times it reworked, and yet it still came out quite quickly. And Bishop writes to Catherine White, her editor at the New Yorker, and he says, Bishop wrote to Catherine White, she says, I'm having a poem in your magazine fairly soon. I think the one and only villanelle of my life. It's very sad, capital S-A-D. It makes everyone weep, so I think it must be rather good in its awful way, and I hope you will like it. Bishop doesn't say much usually about her poems, she just sends them in. But she did say something about this one because one of her other love poems, called Shampoo, had been turned down by the New Yorker, and I think the Bishop was a little bit miffed about that. Anyway, this is a villanelle, and if you don't know what a villanelle is, listen up. 19 lines, okay, 5 tercets, and the final is a quatrain. Now the key to a villanelle is its original origins were in music. Came again as an Italian pastoral song, and so there's an inherent musical quality in villanelles. And the really important thing in villanelle is the first line and the third line of the opening stanza. In this case, it's the art of losing is hard to master, and then the third line is to be lost, if they're lost, is no disaster. Because those two lines then get braided through the poem in various ways. If you just look at the end words, you look at master and disaster, just take those two words, and then look, you see master at the bottom, it's the next quarter, the next tercet, and then you look at the next down, you see disaster, you see master, you see disaster again, and then in the last couplet, master and disaster come together. So this is a kind of intricacy which would hobble almost everybody in this room if you tried to do it. And what Bishop does is she just makes it seem about as easy as you possibly can. There's a wonderful prosy element to Bishop's poetry. I haven't been able to talk about that at all. But she was a great reader of prose and letters, and her own verse at times can have a tremendous flexibility in it, which comes from her interesting prose. One thing you all know about villanelles is I bet everybody in this room knows Dylan Thomas's "Do not go gentle into that good night." And how many can speak the next line, or the answering line rather? Rage, rage against the dying of the light. I mean, once you get the first line, you've got the second, or the response rather. Bishop's is interesting because she chooses to rhyme master and disaster, the sort of opposites. And she also chooses what we would call feminine ending, which seems rather appropriate for Bishop, knowing the absence of an author here. Anyway, this is the poem, and it appears in this. It's the final poem I look at in a chapter on Bishop's love poetry. So, I know. I can't not redo this. I'm still within my time limit. This chapter begins with a wonderful quotation from the poet named Richard Howard. It doesn't begin, but that's where it settles down into it. And Richard Howard's comment goes as follows. Audrey and Rich, I don't know if everyone knows Audrey and Rich's name, a named conjure. Audrey and Rich had been to see Elizabeth in Boston and had attempted to persuade her to be more forthcoming about her sexual orientation. Elizabeth did not regard the enterprise with favor. After Audrey's visit, I remember her describing her new domesticities at Lewis Wharf. You know what I want, Richard? I want closets, and more closets. She does gradually come out of the closet in her poetry. She was totally comfortable being out of the closet for almost all of her life. So that is it, but her poetry, she's always very reticent. And this is a poem in some sense that becomes more available as we go through. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these would bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and the vaster some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Anyway, a lot of stuff in this poem as she practices losing and losing and losing. A terrific imaginative expanse as she keeps going, and it becomes quite fantastic. The biographers want to point out every single little thing here that belongs to Bishop, but they begin to break down a little bit when they talk about losing 2 cities and 2 rivers and then a continent. Clearly Bishop is just, expanding wonderfully here, and then setting up for the final quatrain, even losing you, which of course is a disaster, but she keeps holding it at bay. The joking voice, a gesture I love. Things that Bishop readers pick up on is just that little hyphen in the way that it suggests a little kind of emotional extravagance, as well as the parentheses. I shan't have lied, the kind of extreme formality of that use of shan't. It's evident the art of losing is not, and she changes, not, instead of not hard to master, not too hard to master. It's obviously it's becoming more difficult, though it may look like, and the right in parentheses is becoming almost screaming in terms of its visibility like disaster. One of the things that he said that I like very much was when you hear write it, you also hear the boat term right the ship, and there's a sense in which she is continuing it by writing the emotional balance or recovering the emotional balance. I wanted just to close with one last quotation, and then we'll free for questions and drink. This again, because we're in Stonington, I wanted to read one more thing about James Merrill, and because we have a great Merrill scholar in our presence, I hope I read it and get it correctly. Merrill was reviewing Bishop's collected poems poems, complete poems really. It came out in 1983 in the Washington Post book world. This is when book reviews were frequent in major newspapers. It is a sad pleasure to take up this book. Of all the splendid and curious work belonging to my time, these are the poems, the earliest appeared when I was a year old, that I love best and tire of least, and there will be no others. The language is most often supremely plain. Most of Bishop's poems are in the first person, singular or plural. Sometimes she speaks as the riverman or Robinson Crusoe, more often simply as herself, simply as a quotation marks. The voice can be idiosyncratic, yet because she is to no least degree concerned with making herself any more remarkable than, as the author of these poems, she already is. Hers is a purified, transparent eye, which readers may take as their virtual own. And I think that last part particularly just gravitates right to the center of Bishop's art, that when you do read it, there's something wonderfully transparent about it, and you feel that you can be part of her world, and God can be part of her world, and it's one of the great pleasures in life to be able to do so. I think with James is the last word, and the clock is winding down. And thank all of you again for coming. And did I say a shout out to people who are on YouTube? I wanted to do that. And if I forgot in the beginning, I wanted to say that to my friends who might be watching this. Thank you. If people have questions, we have time for questions. And I'm happy to do my best answering them. The only thing is, if they have to be simple enough so I can reconstruct them and speak them again so that it gets picked up. Am I right about this, Michaela? Yes.
That would be great.
Okay. Right. So if you have questions, please let me hear them. Hi.
Hi, Jonathan. I have a question. Geography 3. I don't remember there's a poem called Geography 3 in that volume. Is there? No. Why is it 3?
Well, that's a good question. Why is Geography 3 called Geography 3 rather than Geography 4 or 5 or whatever it could be? It has to do with the year in school Bishop was, where she read this geographical book. And if you turn Geography 3 inside, there are lots of questions. And some come right from the book, and then some come increasingly from herself. And so she asks them. But Geography 3 is a great title because the poems in that book are from all Latin America as well as North America, and cover all kinds of grounds and are about personal bearings as well. So it's a good title, but good question. Other? Yes,
I can see the logic in the line breaks in Sestina because it puts those key words at the end.
right, yes.
But in some of the other poems, it seems arbitrary. In the
Yeah.
middle of a sentence, and some sentences flow from verse to verse. So, is there a logic?
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to include Song for the Rainy Season is because it shows much greater fluidity in terms of the rhymes, the lines, and there's a logic in the sense that she's really trying to avoid the logic of the Sestina. It is fair to say that of the 90 poems she published, every single one was in a slightly different form from the other. So she was very aware of the freedom she was trying to seek. And again, that's why the Sestina is, you can't get much more of an organized format than the Sestina. And you can get looser than the Song for the Rainy Season in some of the poems, but that has a kind of mesmerizing swiftness to it in all of its variety, and the rhymes are very much a part of that too. Thank you. that was a question about freedom of Bishop's rights. I forgot to repeat the question. Other questions? Don't you want to know about her relationship with Yoda and all of these other things? Thank you.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
what did you think of that film? The design of the film?
You know, I have friends who really like it a lot. But I always have trouble seeing a film with a person whose writing I know as well as I do. And so I think there's no actor who would be part of it. And I guess Bishop's private relations, to me, remain quite private, even though she would be once in a while explicit in her writing. And so I always feel like the wall has been peeled back a little bit further than I want to look. But, you know, I'm an old man.
What happened to you?
I like it though, in the sense that it's set in the house, and now the house member is now quite a bit older, and as Lanny reminded me that when Bishop lived there in 1953, 54, it wasn't quite as lush as it currently is, but still, you know, it's lush, especially in Nova Scotia. There are a couple of films made of Bishop. I mean, Bishop has become a kind of cult figure like Emily Dickinson, where everybody wants to kind of peer into. And there's one called Bishop's, called Summer Camp. Bishop went away to summer camp for 4 or 5 summers. And this is a film that's made up about her time. It's a kind of art film you can't just get it by downloading Netflix. Barbara Hannon did it. And I have a friend who said that she didn't like it because it really just wanted to show that Bishop was an alcoholic. She wasn't an alcoholic at 16, however, but they really wanted to suggest that she was an alcoholic, even at 16. So that's kind of, you know, a little bit crummy.
Hi. Was she an influence on Anne Sexton at all?
Good question. Robert Lowell, of course, was a huge influence on Anne Sexton, but Bishop, no, because unless very indirectly, Bishop didn't care for confessional school of poetry. She made that quite clear. And I think she thought that someone like Anne Sexton wanted to show much more of herself than Elizabeth Bishop ever felt comfortable showing. So I mean, the Lowell thing is just a fabulous moment that he would be minting or helping to mint this school, including Anne Sexton and a whole line of other poets. And yet, Bishop was the person that I think is a poet who most admired. And there are ways in which people can talk about Bishop and Lowell and the interactions and the influence that they have on each other in their poetry. And people think that's most admired. Good question. Sylvia Plath is the other one who becomes the antagonist in this kind of argument, Bishop or Plath. And to some degree, the two of them are the two great female poets of the second half of the 20th century who have fostered a great many other writers. Yeah,
Is it hard for you to figure out the design of your book?
Was it hard for me to figure out the design of my book? Well, when Oxford asked me if I would write a book on a topic, they didn't think I was going to say Elizabeth Bishop, but I did. And they went back and they scratched their heads and said, And 6 months later, they wrote back and said they'd done some homework, and they said, why don't you send us a proposal? So I sent the proposal, which I was pretty sure about the first 4 chapters. And then I said, and then some other stuff. And the readers responded and said, well, he seems like a pretty good idea about the first 4. What about the other 2? And so I responded to the reader's response to part of the protocol back in email and said, I'll figure it out when I get there. And that was, the press was fine with that. So I knew pretty much what I wanted to do. The challenge was to try to keep varying the chapter and the format so that after that long, the second chapter, where I really went through about 30 or 40 poems in a moment or references, The next chapter is really just on armadillo, pretty much. So I thought, okay, let's take a breath. And then you had to write on painting, write on painting and poetry. And Bishop was a setup for that. And she has a poem called Poem, which you should all read and weep. I mean, it is one of the great poems of the 20th century, and it's about art, and it's about poetry, and it's about memories, lots of things, and it's about a painting her great Uncle George painted, and so no one read about that. And then it occurred to me that no one really had written about love. I mean, they've written roundabouts, so I just sort of had a chapter dedicated to it. And I didn't really, I can't really write about certain forms of love that other people can write about. And so I really want to write about love in poems. And so that came down. And then the travel poem, the idea of having a final chapter on travel poems, that just kind of dropped out of the sky. And I was very grateful for that. It concludes with a poem called Santorin. And Santorin is one of the most glorious poems ever written. And you should just, if nothing else tonight, read that before you go to bed. Okay? It will make you want to go up the Amazon River, or down the Amazon River, whichever way you go. Other questions on that? Well, you've gone well beyond your cocktail hour. So thank you very much. And I look forward to